gentlemen, hope you're well. Happy New Year again. We're back again, back at it. Thank you so much. We can get through this book. I'm absolutely overwhelmed, feeling rather optimistic. Now, humanities. Investigating the Social World 2, Chapter 7, page 220. This is edited by Deborah H. Drake, Andy Morris, Alan Shipman, and Katie Wheeler. Thank you, all the listeners, Castbox and YouTube. We're going on Chapter 7, Immigration and Borders, People, Policies and Processes. Economic migrants. These are people who migrate in order to work. Typically, this category accounts for most migrants and companies. Those requiring a visa and those not requiring one. Nations usually have agreements with other nations about whether their citizens require visas to travel. Work applied to them. The European Union currently practices a system of allowing freedom of movement to other EU nations, citizens as part of the Schengen Agreement. Activity 6. Economic migrants getting working visa to work abroad. Activity 6. What is now the main distinction made between groups of migrants in the European Union's immigration policy? Discussion. The main distinction is between EU nationals who do not need visas to travel, reside or work, and non-EU nationals who do. The United States, or on the other hand, has a green card, residence and work permit, lottery every year, with millions of entrants, and where tens of thousands of green cards are distributed. As a guide, the United States admitted just under 500,000 green card holders to permanent residence in the country of 2012. Historically, visas have been issued on the basis of gaps in the labour force and of the nationality of the applicants. Some countries are excluded from access to visas and others are subject to more scrutiny than others. For applicants from nations subject to extra scrutiny, for reasons to do with political instability, security, etc. The border is in reality the embassy, where they are interviewed by an migration official. So there is a significant divide between nationals needing visas for whom the application process is costly in terms of time and money, and those who do not need a visa. Policy creates those categories and policy changes over time. Do you think this is fair? Page 221. What policy does to immigrants, categories, boundaries and justice? 4.2. Highly skilled migrants. Some markets for labour and international and some economic migrants, often requiring a visa, are recruited via skilled migration schemes. States compete to attract migrants with particular skills, often related to engineering, health, computer programming, or other specialised fields. It could be argued that countries with point-based systems, e.g. Canada, Australia, already operate this type of filtering as the standard. Indeed, there are often age limits and salary thresholds attached to the filtering in the first place. Many countries use special schemes in addition to existing visa schemes for attracting migrants who have skills that are relatively short supply. Typically, these sought after migrants will be identified by qualifications and salaries. Then often different conditions to entice them in, such as taxes, breaks, visas that are attached to the migrant rather than the employer, so they do not have to reapply if they change employers. Some family reunification, the option to apply for citizenship, etc. The UK has long operated such schemes to recruit specialised medical staff into the National Health Service, while Germany's Blue Card scheme and the Netherlands' Expat Centre procedure are examples of this in practice elsewhere. Asylum seekers and refugees. In the aftermath of the Second World War, thousands of people displaced by fighting has been housed in temporary camps. The United Nations produced an international agreement about what to do with refugees in the future. This convention and protocol of 1951 contained the definition of a refugee as someone with a well-founded fear of being prosecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or politician opinion, if he/she returned to their country. At the 1951 convention referred specifically to the aftermath of the Second World War. It was reframed and expanded in the 1967 New York Protocol. These agreements basically create a new official category of migrant who moves to escape persecution. Governments agreed to standardise procedures and recognise refugee status granted. Status granted in other states. From this point on, there were two new connected officials categories: an asylum seeker who has lodged an official case to be considered as a refugee, and a refugee who has been granted this official status. As the members of asylum seekers are largely determined by political instability, it is not possible to arbitrarily limit their numbers or spread out applications evenly. So, in a course of wars and natural disasters, many people are displaced. However, asylum seekers and refugees have very different entitlements. Each country has the right to set rules around what benefits asylum seekers receive, while refugees usually receive a level of rights approaching that of citizens. You will learn much more about the category of migrant in the next chapter. 4.4 Students. Due to the eventual free regimes, foreign students are highly sought after by Western universities, particularly those from growing economics in Asia, as they represent lucrative markets. In the 2012-13 academic year, there were 425,000 students in higher education institutions, of whom 300,000 come from outside the EU. UK Council for International Student Affairs 2015. The United States had around 1 million foreign students in 2014, more than 250,000 of whom were Chinese nationals. US Immigration and Customs Enforcement 2014. Students typically enjoy a different migration regime from other migrants. They are allowed entry to the nation to study, and there is often some latitude for them to take paid work depending on the countries issuing the visa. In a summary, immigration policy differs across time and place, and how borders are constructed is a question of social justice. At the time of writing are four principal categories of migrants: asylum seekers and refugees, economic migrants, highly skilled migrants, and students. 5. The control of state border control in the 21st century. Immigration policies change frequently as different governments reprioritise and use different rationales aimed at reducing particular forms of immigration and open up others. Typically in the 21st century, Western governments have tended to narrow the grounds for economic immigration and treat asylum seeking as an area needing further attention, while student and highly skilled migration schemes have been expanding. Changing the rules means that some previously legal situation activities become categorised as illegal. There are a number of ways of breaching immigration rules, mainly crossing the border without required documentation, staying beyond the date stamped in a visa overstaying, undertaking activities such as paid work or claiming social security benefits are not allowed under the conditions of a particular type of visa. All these are civil offences rather than criminal ones, as you will see in more detail in the following chapter. This section will explicitly raise the idea of dynamic field of policy where changes can lead to seemingly different immigration picture. In the 21st century, a range of technologies and agencies, including some from the private sector, are used in immigration control. In the post-war period, immigration in most countries was the responsibility of the Minister of Labour and Employment. Now it is usually justice and or security. This demonstrates the important reframe of immigration from a tool for rebuilding the economy to a problem that must be seen to be managed in order to placate public opinion. In this section, you will look at four emerging trends that illustrate this reframing of migrants crossing borders. Surveillance, outsourcing, detention, deportation. In surveillance, page 224. Borders are made by policy and, as you have seen, this form of boundary making is not neutral, but it means different things to different people. The United States-Mexican border is a result of war fought in the 19th century, or the same could be said in the Franco-German border. If the border is defined as the place where you have to show your ID, it can effectively exist in places other than the physical border. For example, embassies. Gold et al. 2009, Big O 2009. Residential areas and workplaces hundreds of miles from a border. Aguera 2012, or universities. To enable surveillance of these types of border, technologies such as fingerprinting, eye recognition, and storage of data in international shared databases deployed. The European Union even has an agency, Frontex, charged with guarding the European borders and sharing information. It also trains agencies of countries outside Europe to make international cross-border surveillance of border crossing more manageable. In a cool twist, formal border crossing has become an entertainment spectacle on cable television. As a set of reality television shows have emerged the Anglophone world since around 2004. Portraying the work of border officials, border security, Australia's front line, UK border, force, border patrol, New Zealand, border security, Canada, border wars and border patrol, United States. 5.2 Outsourcing. Another trend is the employment by the state of a range of traditionally non-immigration agencies for immigration purposes. These include increasing use of police by state border agencies, the addition of immigration stations checking duties of a variety of public and private sector jobs, contracting private security companies to fulfill border control and associated responsibilities such as deportation, detention centres and prisons. Sharon Pickering and Liam Webber, in their 2013 study of this phenomenon in Australia, call this transversal practice, presenting the image of a range of people across a set of different agencies and levels, all involved in immigration, certification and surveillance. A far cry from the old model of the customs offer stamping passports at the border. Having private companies run immigration-related detention centres and providing other services, one through lucrative government contracts, has led to growth of private security companies like Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, and a Group for Security, G4S. The latter is the third largest private company in the world and the largest employer on the African continent. It is involved in providing services to governments from the United States to Australia, the United Kingdom and Israel. 5.3. We look at definition. The use of definition for migration offences is increasing. A major change in late 1990 development of detention as an opinion told in migrants, French NGO, non-governmental organisation. Which monitors development of the detention camp complex, knows that the number of camps in Europe and non-European countries bordering the Mediterranean, but which are part of the EU's network, grew from 324 in 2000 to 473. In 2012, mostly the inmates have neither been charged with, not convicted of any crime. They are held as a deterrent, as a form of exclusion, or to ensure they do not abscond before a decision is made on their status. A clear example of this logic at play is the Australian government's use of detention centres in the desert and the islands surrounding the country. Since early 2000, people arrive in Australia by boat, usually after a dangerous journey across the ocean, and who have no documentation are currently held in a centre on Christmas Island, with no opportunity to apply for asylum and are then deported. This practice of holding and returning in widespread on islands belonging to larger states, with Alison Mounts, 2011. It calls for the enforcement the archipelago. Finally, in terms of social policy, the privatisation of the state's responsibilities increase the potential for making detention into profit-making business. As noted earlier, private security companies like CCA and G4S are heavily implicated in the detention process across the world. Deportation. The ultimate logical conclusion of defending borders is to physically eject unwanted people from national territory. Deportation is supposed to be used at the end of the legal process, but it is now increasingly used instead of them. National security is used as a rationale, with its permissible expectations to the rules. This does not necessarily equate to more deportations, but changes how they come about. As more acts become illegal, because laws change, deportation is increasingly used as punishment for offences that were previously dealt with under civil law. Example, infringement of immigration law. Although it is primarily used against foreign nationals, deportation now also be used to punish naturalised citizens who break particular rules, as is the case in the UK. Increasing surveillance, outsourcing, detention and deportation are trends that are changing with immigration policy is how it is implemented and by whom. It is leading to overlaps between the public and private sectors, between trained and untrained people, checking documentations, and significantly to the convergence of criminal and immigration law. In what US legal scholar Juliet Stump has termed crimmigration, this will be the focus of the next chapter. Borders are the staples of immigration, and crossing them is subject of policy. However, borders are not always where they are marked on a map, and sometimes they change place. As you have seen, borders play an important role in demarcating different categories of migrants and is constructing their rights and the access to just treatment. In the summary, there are various ways of breaching immigration rules that are civil offences rather than criminal ones. A range of technologies and agencies are involved in controlling immigration. Borders play an important role in democrating different categories of migrant and constructing their access to just treatment. Just going to have a quick break. I'm going to get ahead on. I'm going to hopefully finish this book today. We'll start my next one. Hopefully. Not sure how many more pages we've got. Oh no, I don't think we're all finished, but it won't be near far off. No, it won't be finished today, but more pages I thought. Couple more days yet. Anyway, conclusion. Immigration is a subject of public debate in which different ideas about justice, rights and entitlements often come into conflict with one another. It is the role of social scientists to be carefully evaluate popular claims made about migrants, like those read in the tabloid headlines. At the beginning of this chapter, consider how rationals underpinning the immigration policies are constructed and what their consequences may be. In this chapter, you may have explored immigration as an important area of social policy which constructs boundaries between people in the form of borders. You have seen how there are different rationales for control of borders and which principally concern economic or social engineering, control of demography, and sometimes many rationals are in play at the same time. The chapter has introduced the different categories of immigration and immigrants, all of which are dealt with in separate ways through different policies. At the beginning of this chapter, you learn that controls of immigration have only been in operation for a relatively short time and were introduced as a way of controlling population movement at the end of the 19th century. Following the Second World War, the character of immigration policy changed considerably for several reasons. Immigration was understood as a way of rebuilding economics and enabling people to move to find work and prosperity. Yet, because of the introduction of welfare systems around this time, there was also much debate about who had the right to stay and access these benefits, as the EU and the Schengen area have expanded since the 1980s. The distinction between the EU nationals and the non-EU nationals is now the most significant one in Europe, including some people, while excluding others. In recent years, changes to immigration policy have meant that the line between legal and illegal actions have shifted, partly for the use of methods of control as surveillance, detention and deportation, which had led to some migration behaviours becoming criminalised. It is because of the capacity of immigration policy to exclude people from accessing valued resources that is strongly connected to systems of social justice. In the next chapter, the issues of criminalisation will be explored more fully. You will see the criminalisation of immigrants is growing, and that has particular impacts on different groups fleeing persecution and seeking asylum. You'll be looking at charges in border security and a system of border controls and detention centres utilised to prevent illegal immigration into Europe. The concept of criminalisation will be introduced, which refers to the use of criminal law, as opposed to the use of social policies to manage immigrants. Introduction. On page 237. The previous chapter outlined the importance of social policy in understanding immigration and asylum. Towards the end of the chapter, you considered some critical criminology issues in relation to immigration, specifically the criminalisation of migrant groups and key aspects within this, such as detention. This chapter develops these issues by looking at growing trends in the criminalisation of immigrants and ways in which can impact on women, men and children fleeing persecution and seeking asylum. It considers the impacts that policy and law have on the lives of asylum seekers living at borders and or awaiting asylum decisions. This chapter will mainly focus on people seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. However, a number of trends across Europe relate directly to changes in the UK. The broader European context will be set in relation to what has been called border criminologies and the idea of crimmigration. Crimmigration refers to the use of criminal law to manage immigrants. Expanding on ideas you encountered in the previous chapter, it unpacks continuous issues in the politics of asylum, such as detention in immigration removal centres, the treatment of women seeking asylum, welfare and poverty, and securitisation. You will also look at the gendered implications of asylum policy and consider the experiences of women and children who have been detained. In this chapter, you will explore the background development of what's known as the border criminologies in relation to social world, ways in which migrants and asylum seekers are controlled, as well as the problems related to such controls, the role of criminal justice in immigration control, and debates in surrounding their relationships. The concept of criminalisation in relation to criminalisation of asylum seekers in Western Europe, specifically in the UK. Problem areas created by border control agendas such as immigration, detention, dispersal, destitution and deportation. Chapter 8, Section 1. Controlling immigration. Begin by looking at changes in border security that have been made possibly by increasing legal and social on immigration and introducing the concept of Fortress Europe. Section 2. The policies of seeking asylum in UK. Examines the issues of welfare restrictions and gender inequality that can arise in the complex UK asylum system. Section 3. The immigration crisis looks at the politics of the immigration removal centre and the impact of those detained in them. Page 239. Controlling immigration. Immigration is a highly debated issue on contemporary politics and society. Government representatives and members of Parliament in the UK commonly focus on reducing or controlling immigration, usually based on political factors such as economic migration flows between European Union countries, as you saw in Chapter 7. Mass media, particularly tabloid newspapers, place a lot of focus on problems surrounding immigration, sometimes distorting the realities of asylum seeking, economic migration and net migration, defined later. Immigrants are often represented as legal or bogus, deceptive, and such tabloid stories seldom explore accurate patterns in migration. The term net migration refers to the number of people per year immigrating to emigrating for leaving or a certain country. This includes applications for asylum in a country, which will be a major focus of this chapter, as well as student visa and temporary work permits. Although it may not necessarily be the migrants will leave, stay permanently, recent growth in net migration in the UK. I mean, some people seek asylum to get into university. I know, say from the Caribbean, I met a few Nigerian colleagues, university students. They migrate with their families to go to university or away from their families, so they can go to university and get their heads stuck in the books without any worries of their family at home. So they migrate to better themselves, better their prosperity. Sometimes I wish I could pick myself up and move, get my head down, studying somewhere. Sometimes you feel like you need it just to get your head focused. I'm in a bit of a mixed environment at the minute. Where more people have immigrated and fewer emigrated, have led key political parties to increase controls on the number of people coming into the country. These controls include attempts to cap net migration, targets 11.5 the covenant of the number over 2,000 people leaving and entering per year. From looking at the chart in Figure 8, would you say immigration and emigration figures have risen or fallen in the period shown? They have fallen from December the 3rd they've gone up a little bit, only a little bit. Overall, people moving out and coming into the country have both remained fairly steady considering the length of time examined. However, as you can see, there are higher rates of people entering the UK than those leaving during the period. From 2008, fewer people moved away from the UK, which is likely related to the economic recession that developed in the same year. When people's financial ability to leave become more limited, immigration also steadily fell this time, but begin to increase again towards the end of 2013. This means that net migration increased, as you can see from a bar chart at the bottom of the graph. Since the early 1990s, there has been an increase in border controls, and this has a number of major impacts on people seeking asylum. As you saw in the previous chapter, asylum seekers are people claiming to be fleeing prosecution under the 1951 Refugee Convention. Reasons for doing so are often related to violence during a conflict or period of political unrest, where people who identify as being part of a specific ethnic, national and political group have been deliberately targeted for systematic abuse. A number of major conflicts, such as the wars and the conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and the former Yugoslavia, Libya, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Somalia, to name but a few, led to an increase in people travelling to European countries to apply for refugee status. However, in the light of the increase in people seeking asylum, political parties across Europe, particularly in the Western Europe, made a number of legislative and policy changes aimed at controlling the flow of migrants. These include in Dublin II regulation, which requires the first country that the asylum seeker arrives in to take responsibility for their claim for refugee status, meaning they should not attempt to claim in a second country and may be returned in the first European country they arrived in if they do so. Since many people move overland from Middle Eastern and North African regions, this may mean that countries such as Italy and Greece are held responsible for a high number of applicants. Other changes in policy include the expansion of measures to detain asylum seekers and undocumented migrants in immigration removal centres. The latter issue will be discussed more thoroughly throughout this chapter. Take a few minutes to think about what impact the implementation of net migration targets might have on the rights of people seeking asylum on the basis of the refuge from prosecution. Think, for example, about the kinds of cases that might be advantaged or disadvantaged through an immigration system that focus only on numbers of migrants and not on the reasons why people immigrate. In this discussion, having targets in the immigration system can mean that the number of people entering is the main focus of border control agencies, rather than each individual cases. Therefore, some people's claims might be overlooked in favour of being processed quickly rather than be thoroughly considered. For example, although applicants with heavily documented evidence of persecution may have their cases resolved easily and be granted asylum, it can also mean that people who have complex cases or may struggle to provide evidence of persecution, such as people who have been sexually tortured, have their claims rejected or unfairly considered. Border criminologies. In the light of concerns about border control, there has been an increase in the study of what has become known as border criminologies. In the wider field of criminology, the idea of border criminologies has developed in response to the growing use of detention centres and increasing numbers of migrants being viewed as criminals. This has invited questions and debate in criminal justice arenas, as more people have begun to be targeted and processed by the criminal justice system, which in turn has meant more people are confined in prisons and immigration removal centres. As you will see more depth in section 3, criminology generally, and critically criminology in particular, is often concerned with many of the other issues inherent border controls, such as the use of surveillance and related technologies, surges in criminalisation of certain social groups, intensified process of offering through media sources and news reports. At the same time, social policies has become increasingly geared towards restricting the entry of internal movements of migrants and has been strengthened through the use of criminal law to prosecute people in immigration-related offences, such as working without permits. However, as criminologists Ayers and Bosworth 2013 argue, although scholarly interest in the role of criminal justice in the immigration process developed from the 1990s in areas such as the refuge studies, human geography and sociology, criminology has been slower to pay attention. 1.2 Regulation, Policy and Control. A number of key changes have been made across Europe, North America and Australia since early 1990s to move immigration law closer to the realms of criminal law, while asylum and immigration have historically focused on the rights of those fleeing poverty or persecution. See the 1951 Refugee Convention. Recent moves in policy and practice have impacted on those seen to be legal in host countries, such as increasing the use of detention for asylum seekers and limited routes and opportunities for people seeking asylum to move across borders to safety. Francis Webber, a legal practitioner who works on asylum case law in the UK, identified a number of ways that asylum seekers are controlled by the state and other agencies. Webber points out examples of how social control and colonisation has expanded, particularly in responding to immigration through criminal justice process. These examples include increased fines and prison sentences for people found smuggling immigrants, and the extension of border controls to areas affected by conflict or unrest that inflict people's capacity to migrate. Webber also includes increases in detention and criminalisation entry without relevant visas or documentation. She specifically points out the following. The 1951 Refugee Convention requires refugees to have their country of origin before seeking asylum. However, some countries require people to have visas before they enter. Therefore, countries which ask individuals to apply for visas prior to leaving their country of origin limit whether people will be considered as refugees if they apply for asylum. Instead, they can be criminalised or deported for entering without appropriate visa if they reach the UK and other areas. Since 1987, airlines and shipping companies have been liable to receive fines if they transport individuals who do not have valid passports or visas for travel to the UK. This has been extended to the lorry drivers, aimed at those travelling through Calais, which teaches companies and individuals for bringing in undocumented migrants or people who may claim asylum. Criminalising humanitarian smugglers. Smugglers are people or groups who may or may not charge to understand undocumented migrants gain to a country, entry to a country. Although some do this to help people flee persecution who have no alternative. European governments are focused on this as acts by criminal and organised gangs. While this is the case for some, there is a difference between a smuggler and a trafficker, the latter being someone who moves people for financial benefit through selling bodies or body parts. Extension of borders, increased information gathering has meant that the Home Office has extended borders to areas where high volumes of asylum seekers or undocumented migrants may move through, for example, from North Africa, or at the crossing between Calais and Dover. Outsourcing border controls. Some areas across Middle East and Northern Africa have arguably become buffer states that act to reduce, detain and deter people from crossing overland or by sea to reach southern and western Europe. Agencies founded in the European Union, such as Frontex, outsource some functions to private companies. And policy migration across the Mediterranean Sea and Atlantic Ocean, criminalising refugees. This will be the focus in section 2. The Fortress Europe was historically a military term used during the Second World War, but is also often used to describe the ways in which European borders are policed to keep migrants out or to criminalise those who do not fit the regulations outlined in legislation and policy discussed throughout this chapter. It mainly refers to countries in the European Union's Schengen area. As you saw in the last chapter, the agreement allows free movement of EU mitigation, but presents numerous difficulties for people entering from outside this area. This is managed through EU policy and policing, and member states are encouraged to share data and information regarding other forms of migration. It is worth noting that, although there are some standard European policies that are not necessarily applied in the same way and can vary from country to country, for example, countries such as France, UK and Italy have quite limited welfare rights for asylum seekers in comparison to some Nordic countries such as Sweden. Therefore, policies can, to some degree, be open to interpretation, which is often led by a political agenda of each country's government. According to Human Rights Watch, which is a non-government organisation, NGO concerned with investigating and defending the human rights of people worldwide, there has been evidence in countries such as Greece. Private agencies such as Frontex have worked with state agencies to transport and detain migrants entering the country, despite being informed of possible abuses and violation of fundamental rights. This raised questions in criminology on the role of surveillance amongst outsourced agencies, where states, in the case EU member states, can and do people's personal information for social control and detention purposes. For critical criminologists, this relates to Stanley Cohen's idea of dispersal discipline, 1985, through which has raised concerns about social control becoming business by enterprise rather than responsibility of a government or state. 1.4. Precarious life on borders. Before moving on to look at ways in which migrants are criminalised or deterred for entering a country, it is important to consider human cost of concept of Fortress Europe, for example. The Borders Project, which is part of the work of the European Network United of Intercultural Action, has documented 17,306 migrant deaths in or at the border of European countries between 1993 and 2012. United Against Racism 2012, in 2014 alone, the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, 1951-1967, estimated 2,500 people lost their lives attempting to cross the Mediterranean to gain entry to Europe, most of whom are thought to have been fleeing conflict or persecution. Often people are fleeing poverty, conflict and persecution feel they have little option but to risk their lives to save themselves, but with severe consequences, poor health and safety on boats, and overcrowded carriers contributed to migrant deaths. But there are two other key considerations. Firstly, criminalisation of humanitarian smugglers has led some to approach islands such as Lampedusa off the coast of Italy, but not anchor the boat. They has to avoid prosecution. This attempt at avoiding criminalisation means migrant women, men and children have to swim to safety offshore, which is when many lives are lost. Secondly, the increase in border controls has limited the number of migrants entering the journey, and thus many find more dangerous ways to flee their country of origin. Some organisations, such as Amnesty International, argue by creating barriers through surveillance and European politicians. Some countries are failing to protect human rights of migrants or provide safety to those needing most. In summary, border criminology is a constantly benefit area of criminology that focuses specifically on the controls placed on the movement's welfare, rights and criminalisation of migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. Both the movements of migrants and the policies of their welfare are controlled by increasingly restrictive measures that impact the lives of asylum seekers and migrants to varying extents across Europe. These restrictions can have serious consequences for people fleeing persecution and seeking asylum. Page 246. Border criminology and crimmigration. Case study. The politics seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. Imogen Tyler, 2013, page 8536, argues. Before we move on, imagine you're on death's door, death threat in your country. You're bullied, you're sick enough of being bullied, you're getting tortured by debt agencies and whatever else. You want to get away, you want to start your life again, you want to move abroad. But the only way you can get there is trying to be a legal immigrant. The only way you can get there is being a legal immigrant. The only way out, if you can't flee your debts, you can't pay your debts off, you've got no way. You're getting bullied by, not only getting bullied by people wrapped around you, you're getting bullied by debt collectors come through your door taking all your belongings. You've had the worst life of purpose you can ever imagine. I mean, I've been in absolute poverty all my life. I'm trying to get out the other end. How I get out the other end, I do not know. Because when I'm in above water, it seems to get brought back under. I'm at the age of 37. absolutely living I'm not living the worst life, but I'm not living the best life. I'm trying to live my best life. Believe me, I'm trying to live my best life. We all are, we're trying to get through this public austerity that we're all facing together. Some of us more than others. You've got middle class people becoming poor. I think you've got rich people probably coming on the borderline of poor. I don't know. Some rich people that would claim to be above middle class. Anyway, 246. Border criminologies and crimmigration. Case study. The politics of seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. Imogen Tyler, 2013, argues, if you arrive in the UK today to claim refugee status under the 1951 Convention, you enter an extremely complex, bureaucratic system. By this, she is pointing to the multitude of processes in the asylum system that make it very difficult for most people to claim asylum, and particularly difficult if the individual or family cannot speak, read or write in English. People often arrive with limited knowledge or how or where to apply for refugee status, how the system works, or what his entitlements are, such as welfare allowances or housing. Indeed, they may not be aware of their rights under the Refugee Convention or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Like other Schengen area countries in Europe, the UK has been working to reduce not migration, net migration, as figures A2 demonstrates. Immigration specifically asylum application increased from the mid-1990s towards the early 2000s. This was related to a number of conflicts in areas such as former Yugoslavia and Iraq, from which people were fleeing and requesting asylum in the Middle Eastern and European countries. As you can see from the graph in figure 8.2, asylum applications began to drop from the early 2000s, the aftermath of 9/11 of the United States, and subsequently the 7/7, the London bombings, led to an increase in border control, security checks, punitive measures and undocumented migrants, and general tightening of borders in the United Kingdom and further afield. As you can see in figure 8.3, the majority of asylum seekers in the UK are men, and most are between the ages of 20 and 21, 29. This is largely related to men's economic and political ability to migrate, as they are less likely to be primary carers of children and more likely to be politically active. This does not mean that women do not flee persecution, but rather that the forms of persecution that women are more often subject to, such as sexual violence or domestic abuse, are mostly perpetrated by husbands, partners or friends, since these are not necessarily state actors, such as soldiers or police officers. They are therefore not always seen as political acts. It is worth noting that this is a question by many feminist scholars and activists who argue that violence against women in society is related to a number of inequalities which is inherently political as a result from cultural and social values and by way societies are structured. Some of the reasons people seek asylum are due to fleeing areas affected by war, conflict or civil unrest, fleeing directional persecution based on religious or political benefits, fleeing on grounds of sexuality, sexual orientation or sexual identity, where it may be legal or socially prohibited to identify lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender. The asylum process. In the UK, the Home Office is responsible for prosecuting asylum applications. Even though the United Kingdom is made up of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, the Home Office retains power over immigration and asylum. People entering the UK can apply for asylum at any port of entry, such as airports or ferry ports. But full applications are made by the court in London, where the applicant will be interviewed or screened at the asylum screening unit. Applicants will be interviewed or screened at the asylum screening unit. Applicants are expected to provide a range of documents including passports, birth certificates, police registration, certificates, other supporting documents, and evidence of accommodation. A base outline of the procedure is documented in figure 8.4. When making application for asylum, the first interview is undertaken. During the screening process, which may involve discussing reasons for the application, including information on persecution. During this, fingerprints and photographs are taken and the individual's passports and any documentation will be retained. At this point, asylum seekers are given their asylum registration card and individuals should be allocated a case owner who is, in theory, responsible for that application until the final decision. Once initial statements are taken and the interview has been completed, the case description becomes dependent, and the Home Office deemed as the merits of the story, such as depth with information is given and a constituency through multiple interviews. So, application for asylum in a country or port of entry. You have a basic interview and screening, photo and fingerprints. Asylum seeker sent to initial accommodation centre for health screening carried out. Case owner assigned to assess claim. Dispersal of detention asylum seeker. Decision on claim to be made within 6 months of claim. Claims refused. Appeal by asylum seeker. Appeal refused. Removal voluntary return of asylum seeker. With refugee status, leave to remain granted. That's possible from the decision on the claim. It can be claim refused. Appeal, and your appeal can be refused. The move of voluntary return of asylum seeker can be refused as well. There you go. We're going to carry on. We've got a few more minutes to go. Thank you all for listening. I hope you learned, picking up some key takeaway points here with proclamation news and gatherings. We're producing good content every day. I'm a realist. I like talking real stuff, real policies, real procedures. You can't be no more clearer than the absolute sovereignty of the land. I've got the book from the Union in front of me, absolute textbook. You know, you want knowledge, you want to be going places in life, you've got to listen in, take it on board, seek asylum, strictly through the policies and procedures. You need to go to another country with the goodwill to work. As well as extracting the information given by the applicant, a case owner has access to the country of origin information, the COI, which is meant to provide reliable, up-to-date information regarding the country from which the applicant has fled. This should cover a wide range of political issues, including the status of women. While awaiting the asylum decision, or if the decision taken has been a refusal, asylum seekers are not entitled to work in the UK unless they have been resident or the application has been ongoing for more than 1 year. Despite access to employment being a basic human right, United Nations 1948. Even then, dependents of the main applicant, most of whom are women or children, cannot apply to work either. It could be argued that this further increased the social isolation and exclusion of people and their ability to integrate into the country, and also ultimately leaves individuals state dependent and increases poverty within asylum communities. In terms of depriving asylum seekers of the right to work and increasing the likelihood of destitution, the Joint Committee on Human Rights went as far as to say that the government treatment of asylum seekers breaches Article 3 ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights. Threshold of inhumane and degrading treatment, JCHR 2007. In 2013, individual asylum seekers over the age of 18 were eligible to receive £36.62 per week. This money is to pay for food, clothes, travel and any other expenses with amounts just over £3 per day. Importantly, it is much less than other benefit recipients. For example, in 2015, people living British citizens and receiving job seekers allowance received between £57.35 and £72.40 per week, While an application is ongoing, asylum seekers will usually be dispersed or moved or another part of the UK. This is generally to areas such as northwest or northeast of England or Scotland, which are main dispersal areas outside of London. If an applicant is accepted, they may gain asylum status. They have limitations, for example, the right to remain up for 5 years. After the case may be reviewed, or their claim may be rejected. If rejected, they may have the chance to appeal the decision. Many initial decisions are overturned at the appeal stage. Make some notes on the problems you think adult asylum seekers may have if they are not able to work. Compare them to the list in the discussion below. Although there are many points that you may have considered, your answer may include one or more of the following. Destitution asylum seekers receive very little money and so cannot always afford to live to a standard that is deemed acceptable in the UK. State dependency. People seeking asylum are made to depend on the state for money rather than being able to earn money and income. This can include being given food vouchers rather than actual money. That determines whether asylum seekers can shop and what kind of goods they can buy. Impact on skills. People seeking asylum may have worked in professional or skilled jobs before seeking asylum. Not even being able to work can leave people unable to maintain skills they need to subsequently acquire secure employment. Boredom. Although there are some opportunities to study or volunteer, people seeking asylum sometimes report feeling lost or bored. Travelling, even by bus, can be impossible due to the lack of money. Asylum seekers do not have travel paid for, and not being able to work to bring extra income can limit their mobility, even within the town or city in which they are living. Issues in the asylum system. Although the process of seeking asylum seems unfairly straightforward, there are some issues what are seen as problematic for criminologists. These include access to welfare benefits, credibility, the fast-track system, and detention at immigration removal centres. Some of these concerns are summed up by Tyler, who points out that. Thank you, ladies and gents. Page 252. We're going to get it done in it's going to take a couple of days. It's going to take a couple of days. I might do another 50 pages later, not 50, 30 odd pages later. Try and catch up a little bit, get yourself ahead so we can finish the book by tomorrow evening. But I need a break. I'm going to get on my day. It's a freezing cold day. So, yeah, wrap up. All I say is wrap up, stay warm, stay in your house. I won't go and do any exercise. You're quite likely to strain a muscle in this weather. So be extra careful. Stay safe. Try and keep as busy as you can. It's such a horrible time of year. Very, very depressing. It's cold. Could be lonely at home. You just got to keep your mind focused. Keep your mind focused. That's all you can do at this time. Hold on to your loved ones. Tell your loved ones you love them. You might not see them again. I'm going to speak to you guys later. Love you all. Speak soon. God bless. Speak soon.